The master is dead. Good evening, everyone. This is Stone Gasman, live from New York City, and we're going to be doing another anniversary commentary tonight. However, instead of a 50th anniversary commentary, we will be doing a 100th anniversary commentary on F.W. Murnau's classic German vampire expressionistic classic, Nosferatu. A symphony of horror. And let me state that whichever version that you will be watching along with me tonight, make sure you are paused at the title card of Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. Now, as noted in the chat, there are two versions available to view. There is an older print on YouTube, which runs approximately 81 minutes. If you want to go see it for free, that's probably the most convenient one to go to. However, if you want to watch a restored print, which is the same print that is used on the Kino Lorber Blu-ray that came out in 2013, then go ahead and go to that link, which is available at Amazon Prime, and you'll be able to watch the restored version of Nosferatu. And I will give everybody about just 2 minutes here. So like I said, those are the two versions that are available. You can pick whichever one you like. The only difference between the two, at least from what I've noticed, is that of course with the heavy use of tinting in the restored version, it runs approximately 96 minutes. However, that includes an overture. Now, I'm not gonna be talking over the overture because the YouTube print, which here again is right here, that does not have an overture, and that's why I said we need to start at the title card of Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. So, like I said, go to one of those two links and go ahead and get paused on the title card, and we'll be ready to go here in about 2 minutes. Now, there's going to be a lot to talk about tonight as far as Nosferatu, okay? I mean, like I said, this is a special 100th anniversary audio commentary, and I promise you that we're going to try to cover all the bases when it comes to this legendary movie. Now, I believe it or not, one of my favorite genres, period, is silent movies. I mean, I adore silent cinema. Ever since I was a young boy, I would watch Chaplin and Keaton, and then start watching other silent movies just because I became so fascinated these early examples of cinema. And I even wrote a 170-page screenplay called The Flapper, which is about a silent film star in the late 1910s and early 1920s, which is actually about the very first Hollywood scandal. But Nosferatu was not made in the United States. As a matter of fact, it was made in Germany, of course, written by the gentleman that wrote the Golem a couple years later. A couple years earlier. I mean, in 1915, that's one of the first German horror movies, is the Golem. This is the same writer. And basically what he did was he took Dracula and made an unofficial version of it. Now, when we get into it, if you're familiar with Dracula and that story and Stoker's novel, of course, the resemblance is unmistakable. This is essentially a version of Dracula made in Germany in 1921 and released on March 4th, 1922. So, like I said, this is kind of a freely adapted version of the story. So, without further ado, I think we're about ready to get going here. I would recommend keeping the volume extremely low, but not completely off. because I don't want you to miss the music score, which permeates throughout the movie. But I will be sure to read all of the title cards, simply because in the silent era that was actually a pretty typical thing where people would read what was on screen to make sure everybody in the audience what was being said. Because, like I said, all you had back then was the screen and an orchestra that would provide a musical accompaniment. So that's what we're looking at tonight with Nosferatu. So at any rate, we will go ahead and start on the count of three. And actually, before we start, just a shout out to everybody in the chat. I'd like to say hi to Dan Shine, my buddy Dan. We were on Region Free a couple nights ago and had a great discussion on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You should jump over and check out that video that we recorded. But anyway, and yes, I did watch most of Shadow of the Vampire. I wasn't able to finish it. I got most of it watched, but I wasn't able to finish it. But we'll talk about Shadow of the Vampire while we do this commentary. But so I think we're and Cliff Booth. Hey, how you doing tonight? Yeah, looking forward to this one. Oh yeah, like I said, 100th anniversary audio commentary for F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu. So we will count down from 3 right now. Countdown from 3, 2, 1, and play. Nosferatu, a symphony of horror from the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker and directed by F.W. Murnau. Does this version have Dolby Atmos? Yeah. But like I said, this is one of the legendary German expressionistic horror movies. And so there'll be a lot to consume on a visual level. And the great Max Schreck plays Count Orlock. Hutter, played by Gustav van Wangenheim, is going to be essentially our version of Jonathan Harker from the Dracula novel. And Knock, an estate broker played by Alexander Granach, he is essentially going to be the stand-in for Renfield in this story. Professor Bulwer, a Paracelsian, and a ship captain along with 2 sailors. Yeah, this film has a magnificent centerpiece that's actually set on a boat that you'll be wanting to look forward to. But anyway, this is Act 1. Like I said, this is the restored print that I'm watching on Amazon Prime, which is the same print that's on the Kino Lorber Blu-ray. But if you're watching the version on YouTube, you should be seeing the same thing I'm seeing, which is an account of the great Nosferatu. Does this word not sound like the death bird calling your name at midnight? Beware you never say it, for then the pictures of life will fade to shadows. Haunting dreams will climb forth from your heart and feed on your blood. Yeah, that's definitely a German adaptation of Dracula right there. Interpretation freely adapted. But look, I have reflected on the origin and passing of the Great Death in my hometown of Wisborg. Here is its story. Once in Wisborg lived a man named Hutter and his young wife, Ellen. So there we go ahead and set everything up. And this, of course, is Germany in 1921. And it's funny. I mean, a couple weeks ago, I did an audio commentary for Cabaret, which is set in Berlin in 1931, just before the Nazi takeover. And of course, we'll talk about Nosferatu in terms of the controversy in regards to the inspiration for the look and movements of the vampire Count Orlock. But for now, let's go ahead and just introduce to our um, leads here, which include, uh, excuse me, Gustav van Wangenham, a young real estate agent who doesn't really care about his wife. He's more concerned about his career. Now, as I said before, I started out watching silent films when I was probably 8, 9 years old. I mean, I watched probably the first silent film experience I had was the Gold Rush in 1925, the famous Charlie Chaplin picture. And I was automatically entranced by the world of silent movies. I mean, and believe me, I was still watching modern day movies like, Raiders of the Lost Ark or, um, the Goonies or whatever you'd like to pick. But I was also watching silent cinema, and I was slowly but surely filling the gaps, watching 30s films and so on and so forth. But I fell in love with silent cinema at a very, very young age. And like I said, it all started with Chaplin and Keaton. Now, later on, I would discover through many, many silent films that I would seek out, especially ultra rare ones. I mean, let me put it this way. I actually traveled to Oakland in 2012 for a very, very rare screening of Abel Gance's Napoleon from 1927, which is this very famous epic. It ran for 5.5 hours. There were 3 breaks, including a dinner. When I went to go see it at this theater in Oakland, and live orchestra. At the end, there's the climactic triptych finale where the screen splits into 3 different screens. For 1927, that is astonishing. Okay, now look, not everybody has the patience for silent cinema, but I do. I was able to sit there for 5.5 hours mesmerized at a film from 1927. And I've also been to the George Eastman House up in New York, which goes out of their way to preserve films from the silent era, specifically the silent era. And actually, I went to the George Eastman House only in the past couple of years to see a series of films starring the ill-fated silent star Olive Thomas. Olive Thomas was known as the most beautiful woman in the world, and she died in Paris under mysterious circumstances. Nobody knows if it was suicide, murder, or an accident. And she only has 20 films that survive today, and about 5 or 6 of them are available at the George Eastman House, but only exclusively at the George Eastman House. So, needless to say, I've gone out of my way and spent quite a bit of money to check out very rare silent movies in places around the country and ultimately around the world. And Nosferatu, I must have seen this for the first time when I was 13 or 14, because I remember seeing different film clips on television, and I think even during children's programming, maybe even like before the Saturday mornings would begin on television with cartoons and everything, you would see images of Count Orlock actually doing his thing in this movie. And yes, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree, Dan. This film hasn't lost any of its power. Absolutely not. And like I said, in the restored version, it's even better. I love the colors of the restored version. I mean, the dialogue is in turquoise, and we got a yellow shade now, obviously, to reflect off of the sun. which will, of course, play an important part in the climax of the movie. And we'll talk about how that differed from previous interpretations of the story as well. I must travel far, far away to the land of thieves and phantoms. Oh, yes. So, at any rate, this was directed by a man named F.W. Murnau, Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau. He had only made 2 movies before this in 1921, Journey into the Night and The Haunted Castle, both in 1921. And later, he would work for the famed European stage director Max Reinhardt, who made several silent films in the 1910s, but when the Nazi takeover took place, of course, he immigrated to the United States. And he was actually responsible for casting Olivia de Havilland in her very first film, because Reinhardt had done a stage version of Midsummer Night's Dream, the William Shakespeare play. And the movie version, which came out by Warner Brothers in 1935, featured Olivia de Havilland as Hermia and Mickey Rooney as Puck. And it's actually one of the more famous adaptations of that play, although most people would think of the Kevin Kline version from 1999. But that was Max Reinhardt's own film. But both the director and star of Nosferatu were very close in terms of working with Max Reinhardt, who sadly, even though he made a few films, Midsummer Night's Dream being the sole one that's available and everything, he never made another movie, very sadly. I mean, but he did have film schools that he had operating in Hollywood to help theater actors trying to break into the business of film, using everything that he learned in the German theater. Now, I will say that I've seen Douglas Fairbanks silent movies. I've seen, the very first silent movie to really have a narrative, and I think it's pretty much been argued to death that it finally boiled down to The Cabbage Fairy from 1896, which is actually directed by a woman, Alice Guy Blaché. Directed The Cabbage Fairy, the very first movie with a narrative in 1896. It was only a couple minutes, but that's all you need. Now, I think most film historians would agree that the adolescence of film began in 1902 with the release of A Trip to the Moon, which employed some real, honest to God, first time special effects for film. And then the year after that in America, we had The Great Train Robbery, which of course is very famous for the climax after this 10-minute story about the Great Train Robbery, that there's a cowboy who takes out a gun and shoots directly at the audience. And Martin Scorsese was obviously influenced by it. And Great Train Robbery needs to be seen by everybody. I mean, I don't care what genre of films you like or what. That film needs to be seen by everybody. It's on YouTube. It's 10 minutes. Check it out sometime. It's absolutely imperative that people need to see The Great Train Robbery every now and then, because that's really when silent films started to become their own. Although for the next 12 years, up until 1915, they were really just seen as novelties. You put a coin in a booth and you would see a nonsensical strip of film just for the amusement of it. There wasn't really any push by people to try to bring out adaptations until like 1912 when they started doing stuff like Frankenstein. Actually, the first Frankenstein adaptation was in 1910, and in 1912 they started to get more bold with like adaptations of like Richard III and Shakespeare's stories of that nature. Even L. Frank Baum, the creator of The Wizard of Oz, long before the MGM movie with Judy Garland came out, made his own silent adaptations of his Oz stories. So, and in the early days, of course, they were just trying to sell camera equipment, basically. But eventually, people got onto the idea that, wow, we can use this brand new medium to tell epic stories, and that ultimately led to, fortunately or unfortunately, The Birth of a Nation in 1915, which I will say that the director sort of redeemed himself a year later with his movie Intolerance, which of course addressed all the troubling racist aspects of A Birth of a Nation. I've seen A Birth of a Nation, and I'm glad to say I will never ever see it again. It's almost unwatchable, especially in the second half. It's almost unwatchable. But for better or for worse, that is the movie that it seems to be talked about when it comes to the birth of cinema, which is a little ridiculous. I mean, as I said, A Trip to the Moon, Great Train Robbery. And even a month before Birth of a Nation, we had a movie that would make just as much of an impact, have at the box office, and would be just seen as practically by as many people that lived around during that time. Lois Weber was a genuine, honest-to-God filmmaker in the 1910s. She was the highest-paid director in Hollywood at one point, and she was also the first one that was inducted into the Directors Guild. She put out a movie 1 month before Birth of a Nation in January of 1915 called Hypocrites. That exploded. That exploded with the public. And like I said, this was 1 month before Birth of a Nation, where they realized, wow, we should put out theaters everywhere in every town, and we can make these movies and show them to the public. From the seed of sprang the vampire Nosferatu, who liveth and feedeth on human blood. This unholy creature liveth in sinister caves, tombs, and coffins, which are filled with cursed dirt from the fields of the Black Death. Oh, that is so awesome. Oh, love it. Are you a fan of the 1979 Klaus Kinski Nosferatu? I decided not to watch that again. I saw it years ago, and I remember enjoying it, but at the same time, usually the Puritan in me always goes with the original. The 1979 film I should see return to at some point, and like I said, I thought about watching it this week, but I had to watch Shadow of the Vampire, and I was already too busy with other things. And so unfortunately I can't really do a compare and contrast between both those films. But here again, I've heard, it's directed by Werner Herzog, and it stars Klaus Kinski, who is a actor I'm not really that big of a fan of, but this is one of the few films he made which is arguably, I think a must-see for horror fans. I mean, but at the same time, I haven't seen it in years. And I decided to focus my attention solely on the 1922 film. But I should return to the 1979 version at some point of Vampires Terrible, Phantoms by the Seven Deadly Sins. So yeah. He obviously thinks that's a joke. So Hypocrites, which was directed by Lois Weber, that exploded with the public. But of course, D.W. Griffith, who made Birth of a Nation, would make some of the more groundbreaking films of that era in the late 1910s. I mean, Broken Blossoms, 1918, Way Down East in 1920. The movie, what I was talking about before, The Flapper, which is the screenplay that I wrote, is actually directly inspired by a film from 1920, which was Olive Thomas's last movie called The Flapper, available on YouTube. And then in 1921, we started with, I think, The Phantom Carriage was one of the very first, horror suspense fantasy movies. Now, as far as like horror films on screen, I mean, you could make an argument that the 1910 version of Frankenstein was the very first horror film, or you could also go 1915's Suspense, directed by Lois Weber here again, who actually showcased the split screen for the very first time on film. I mean, Lois Weber is one of the most legendary names in the history of film, and yet, of course, nobody talks about her. Everybody talks about D.W. Griffith from that era, and let's put it this way: I think like other film historians, I'm a little tired of people talking about D.W. Griffith. Let's talk about Lois Weber, because she made a movie about abortion in 1916 called Where Are My Children, which became the most talked about and, yes, controversial film of that era. So, and here again, after that, she was indicted into the Directors Guild, and she would be the only woman in the guild for decades. That's not a joke. But unfortunately, when Olive Thomas died, the power that women had garnered in Hollywood actually started to fade away at that point. And it was around the time that women got the right to vote that Olive Thomas died in Paris, and then ultimately Lois Weber, despite making her best film at that point called The Blot, which is a masterpiece. Everybody should definitely check that out too. Women completely lost their power in Hollywood, and they were basically phased out by the male studio executives, not necessarily due to sexism, but just to the buddy drinking pal attitudes of the patriarchal society at the time. But Nosferatu, in many ways, is the first real, genuine, iconic horror film, because everybody, I'm assuming, has seen images from this film at some point in their life, even if they've never seen the entire movie. And also there is, of course, Count Orlock, played by the legendary Max Schreck. In Shadow of the Vampire, he was portrayed by Willem Dafoe. And that movie, while fictional, it actually showcased in a fictionalized form all the rumors and whispers on the set of Nosferatu that Max Schreck was, in fact, a real vampire. Because the truth of the matter is, he did stay in character throughout the entire shoot, and let's just say that disturbed a lot of the cast and the crew, and obviously it started to leak out. Wait a minute, is this guy a real vampire? Because he's not breaking character. I mean, he's never breaking character. He looks like a vampiric Robin Hood here, but I mean. And of course, this was years before Douglas Fairbanks would play Robin Hood. But yeah, this is some seriously creepy stuff. I mean, even after all these years, 100 years later, something about this movie, and you could look aside the controversy regarding how it freely adapts itself from Dracula. I mean, it is very true that Bram Stoker's widow, Florence, actually sued when she found out. And in fact, she got a letter anonymously in the mail. and said, they made a movie based on your husband's book, and it's premiering in Germany. And she had no idea that it was being made, obviously. Now, she sued, and you could say, I mean, if you want to argue about it, I think it would be irrelevant, because the truth of the matter is that she was financially destitute at the time, and I honestly do not blame her one iota for wanting to come after this film. But the problem I have with Florence wanting to sue and get a cut of whatever the movie was going to get, and maybe take everything that it makes, is that she wanted also to destroy the entire movie. Every single print had to be destroyed. Now, she won the case, but very, very luckily, and yes, we're grateful, with this film, as with any other silent film, that it exists, that it survives. We're at the end of Act 1, and we're entering Act 2 right now. But we are so eternally grateful that we still have Nosferatu 100 years later, because very, very luckily, there were some prints that escaped Germany in via international distribution, and thus the movie, against all odds, even when Bram Stoker's wife sued and everything, it still survived. Thank goodness. Look at those eyebrows. Yeah. I love that. The skeleton on top of the clock. That's awesome. Like I said, this film is full of indelible, iconic, unforgettable imagery. And I mean, even if the camera was very static with a lot of productions at this time, I mean, this movie just feels alive. It feels like it's bubbling, and well, dare I say it, bleeding every minute of every minute. I mean, this is just I think a revelation in terms of the annals of cinema, and I think that it's something to cherish and behold, especially in the restored version. Can we not stay together a little while longer, my lovely man? It's still quite a long time until sunrise, and I sleep a day, dear fellow, completely dead to the world. Oh yeah. Now, I think now would be a good time to talk a little bit about, or talk a little bit more about F.W. Murnau, the German film director, and his later movies, because after Nosferatu, he made a 1922 movie called Phantom, and then in 1924. He directed a film which is also considered a classic, which is called The Last Laugh, or Der letzte Mann. And it's about a nameless hotel doorman who loses his job. It is a cinematic example of the Kammerspielfilm, or chamber drama genre, which follows the style of short, sparse plays of lower middle-class life that emphasize the psychology of the characters rather than the sets and the action. The genre tried to avoid the intertitles or title cards of spoken dialogue or description that characterize most silent films, in the belief that the visuals themselves should carry the most of the meaning. So, The Last Laugh, that is considered another F.W. Murnau masterpiece. And then after that, he would make Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. Now, in 1927, we had the very first Academy Awards ceremony in Hollywood, which was basically not much of a dinner in a room, basically somewhere in a hotel. But the Best Picture, the movie that would win Best Picture, would be Wings, produced by Howard Hawks. However, the film that would win a special category, which was in fact unique and artistic picture, it went to Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. Many have called it one of the great films of the silent era. Of course, the Library of Congress has observed it, as with many other films. And that was released by the Fox Film Corporation in 1927. And thankfully, they have released it on Blu-ray. But that is considered F.W. Murnau's crowning achievement, is Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. After that, he made Four Devils, which unfortunately is considered lost because of the star of the movie borrowed it from the studio and never returned it. So many silent films lost to time. Unfortunately, about 80%. 80% of silent films are completely lost. And we may never, ever see them again, particularly over a century later. But historians and film fans can still hope. We can still hope. But F.W. Murnau's final film would in fact be Taboo, A Story of the South Seas, which was controversial because it actually had tribal nudity in it. And he made that movie with Robert J. Flaherty, who was a very famous documentarian who made the very first, one of the first documentaries on film, which was Nanook of the North, also in 1922. And yes, there will be a commentary for that later this year. But Nanook of the North is about Eskimos. Let's see, just one. I know I'm not trying to go off on a tangent. I know we're doing Nosferatu here, but I mean, I think it's important. Okay. In June of 1922, that's when Nanook of the North came out, and it's essentially in the tradition of what would later be called salvage ethnography. The film follows the struggles of the Inuk man named Nanook and his family in the Canadian Arctic. It was written and directed by Robert J. Flaherty, who also served as cinematographer, editor, and producer. And that, of course, has also been preserved in the National Film Registry. So, but that was his last film because, unfortunately, on March 10th, 1931, a week prior to the opening of Taboo, which he made with Robert Flaherty, Murnau drove up Pacific Coast Highway from Los Angeles in a hired Packard touring car. His valet swerved to avoid a truck that unexpectedly veered into the northbound lane. The car overturned after striking an embankment, throwing all occupants out of the vehicle. Murnau suffered a head injury and died the next day at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital before the premiere, approximately 1 week before the premiere of his very last movie. He was only 42 years old. He was only 42 when he died on March 11th, 1931. And yet, at the same time, his resume contains at least three immortal classics. Nosferatu, Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, and The Last Laugh. And yes, they are all absolutely worth checking out. Please seek them out. I mean, if you want to see the full scope of, F.W. Murnau's work as a director, those are the three films to check out right there. So, but yeah, very, 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 very sad. Very sad that he died way too young. I mean, I'm 42. I mean, that is sad and scary right there. But at night, that same Nosferatu digs his claws into his victims and suckles himself the hellish elixir of their blood. Yeah. All right. Just to do a timestamp here real quick, we are at approximately 35 minutes in. And like I said, I am watching the restored version, the restored Kino version on Amazon Prime. So yeah, approximately 35 minutes in, we have an hour left to go. I want to say hi. I want a Nosferatu spoof starring Eugene Levy. Stone brother, hey, what's up, Christian? How you doing? Yeah, I hope you're watching Nosferatu with us because this is just legendary right here. Legendary movie. Like I said, it doesn't matter. I don't care where you're from, if you're in film or not. Everybody has seen clips from Nosferatu, whether they know what it is or not. That's how iconic this movie is, and I'm sure it will live with us for another 100 years. To be perfectly honest. Oh man, this is all creepy stuff. There's Count Orlock emerging into the door. This is one of those images. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, the eyes alone are just terrifying. Now, I think now is the good time, is the perfect time to mention and get out of the way because it's unfortunately a very sad element. Birth of a Nation, of course, is infamous for its racist use of blackface and everything in a time of Jim Crow America. And reportedly, Woodrow Wilson loved the movie when he was showed it in the White House in 1915. That is what damages that film's reputation. I mean, even though film historians need to see it and cross it off the list, it's not one that I recommend everybody see because it's just too unbearable to watch. Nosferatu does have a negative stigma about it, but it has to do with the presentation of the vampire Count Orlock, because a lot of critics at the time, and of course now, have noted that that Count Orlock is more or less an amalgam of Jewish stereotypes in 1920s Germany. Of course, this is about 10 years before the Nazis would rise to power, but at the same time, basically it combines a lot of negative Jewish stereotypes in the role of Count Orlock. However, this has kind of been disputed by a number of people as well because it doesn't make sense why that would be the case, considering that the writer, who also wrote the Golem, all three versions of the Golem several years earlier, was Jewish himself. So the author of Nosferatu is Jewish. I mean, the one who adapted it from the Bram Stoker book Dracula freely, he was Jewish himself. So I mean, it doesn't make sense why. I mean, if he was intentionally or unintentionally, what exactly he was trying to do. I don't know if people just interpreted it wrong or what the case is, but unfortunately, people still do see that aspect with this movie. I personally can look past that. I mean, in this particular case, because here again, I mean, I don't think it's definitive either way. If Count Orlock was really just a representation of how of how people at the time, how anti-Semites looked at Jewish people in terms of supposed looks and everything, and it's horrible. But at the same time, I mean, here again, the author's Jewish, so I don't understand where exactly that came from or what the interpretation might have been, or maybe somebody else could help me out on that. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, in this particular case with Nosferatu, I can not really think about that and still enjoy it as a early adaptation of Dracula. But unfortunately, that has been a stigma that has followed this movie ever since the 1920s when it appeared in Germany. Now, I mean, German Expressionism, of course, more or less started the year before with the Cabinet of Caligari, which is another essential film from this era. I mean, start writing these titles down: The Femme Carriage, um, Nosferatu, and also, but in 1922, and I will say for Halloween, I will indeed be doing another 100th anniversary commentary, but it will be specifically for Haxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages, which is the Benjamin Christensen movie, which I honestly think gives Nosferatu a run for its money in terms of horror. I mean, when I first saw Nosferatu, I was creeped out by it. It never really outright scared me. Of course, the look of Orlock is so hideous and grotesque that you can't help but flinch at the sight of him. But at the same time, Haxan Witchcraft Through the Ages, that's one of those silent horrors that never left me. The impact that movie had on me was like, oh my God, this feels too legitimate and way too. It was one of those movies where I felt like I was watching something that I shouldn't be watching, like like looking in the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead or something like that. It just, with Haxan, I feel like I shouldn't be watching it, which is just incredibly creepy on its own. But what makes Nosferatu, of course, so memorable is, without a doubt, our star, Count Orlock, played by Max Schreck. Now, if that name is familiar to you, you will probably recognize the name as being Christopher Walken's character from Batman Returns. The screenwriter of Batman Returns, Daniel Waters, also wrote Heathers in 1989, and basically it's an inside joke. And I don't think that they intentionally tried to make Christopher Walken out to look like Nosferatu or anything, but he was he still looked pretty creepy. He still looked pretty ghostly in Batman Returns. Who knows how much inspiration was put in there. But Max Schreck was born in Berlin on September 6, 1879. He lived to be 58 years old. His father did not approve of him working in the theater, so his mother would secretly give him like theater allowance money so he can continue training in the theater. But it wasn't until after his father died that he finally was able to attend a drama school. And as I stated before, like the director F.W. Murnau, we've reached the end of Act 2, and we're about to start Act 3 here. There are 5 acts, at least in the restored version. It's the action is split up into 5 acts. So he was brought to the hospital yesterday by farmers. They said he had fallen. He still has a fever. Oh, man. But Max Schreck, he would sadly die of a heart attack at the age of 56 on February 19th, 1936. And he made roughly about 30 movies. He made roughly about 30 movies, but none of them are near as recognizable as Nosferatu. Oh, Nosferatu was coming. Danger was on its way to Wisburg. Professor Bulwer, a Paracelsian who was then investigating the secrets of nature and its unifying principles, told me about it. Caskets filled with dirt were loaded on the double-masted schooner, the Empusa. And so now we are about to enter probably the most impressive sequence in the entire movie, which is the 3rd act, set on this boat. I love the grayish, greenish tint that they're using here for the restored version. Ship sets sail tonight. And so we're going to be treated to a few more grotesque images coming up here in this third act of Nosferatu. And prior to Nosferatu, I mean, like I said, Max Schreck made about 3 films over the course of his career, but he only made 2 before Nosferatu. So this was really his first star leading role. But the 2 films he made before that were The Mayor of Zalmaya in 1920 and The Story of Christine von Hair in 1921. But Nosferatu obviously kind of put him on the map. And I was going to double check because honestly, when I looked through Max Schreck's filmography, I did not recognize anything else that he had done. But let me just double check real quick. I mean, he had done an adaptation of The Merchant of Venice in 1923, and he actually did a movie called The Republic of Flappers, which actually sounds kind of interesting. He played Ludwig II, King of Bavaria. But honestly, none of the movies that he made, none of the other movies he made in his career are even close. I mean, towards how recognizable that Nosferatu did. The dreadful methods of carnivorous. All right. Yeah. I mean, when I watch silent movies, particularly restored versions of silent movies, I always relish in the tinting. There's something about it. Like I said, silent films are a very obsolete genre, which is, kind of a shame. It's understandable, but it's kind of a shame. And I kind of wish more filmmakers would, actually try to go the extra mile and actually make a modern day silent movie, because I think that of course, the last big one we had was The Artist from 2011, which won a number of Academy Awards, including Best Picture, but only because it basically stroked the cock of Hollywood when it came to classic film. And, cynically, I have to point that out. But look, if you're a silent film fan, you have to check out The Artist. I mean, what bothered me about that movie was actually about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way into it, when they decided to play the music, the Bernard Herrmann score from Vertigo. And I objected to that use of music, and so did Kim Novak, but for different reasons. She actually went so far as to call it a cinematic rape. I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far in them throwing Bernard Herrmann's score from Vertigo and The Artist as a cinematic rape. I just would not go that far. What I will say, though, and the reason why it bothered me so much is because this was a movie that was set in a specific time period. It was set in early 1930s, late 1920s, early 1930s, just as silent cinema was about to morph into talking pictures. Okay. The Vertigo score just completely yanked me out of the time period, and thus it became a major, major distraction. It became a major distraction. But that was a huge issue I had with The Artist, and not to say I don't think it's her best picture. And here again, I do think that Kim Novak went over the top with that argument, but at the same time, I kind of feel for her. I wish they had not used that music in The Artist. But anyway, okay, these are some images right here. Little more than a phantom. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Spiders. Yes, we have spiders. Yeah, you want to try to creep out a silent film audience? Yeah, just put some spider webs and some spiders up on the screen, and they'll be freaked out enough. But you got to imagine being in 1922 and seeing this for the first time. I mean, just the effect it had on its audience who had never seen or experienced anything like this before. I mean, it must have been remarkable. Ellen was often spotted on the beach in the solitude of the dunes. Her eyes scanned the waves and the horizon as she pined for her beloved. Ah. Yeah, I love that. I love that beach shot with the crosses, all slanted down like that. That is amazing. Playing some croquet. It's funny. Yeah, I mentioned Heather's earlier. Of course, that comes up on a croquet match. But anyway, let's do a timestamp real quick. We are approximately 51 minutes and 30 seconds in. And like I said, I am watching the restored version where we have approximately 44 minutes left of Nosferatu. So Nosferatu is still on the boat, and when he does eventually exit the boat, it's very, very memorable when we see all the rats and everything. We'll see that here in a minute. But of course, by now, I think that most audiences and all of us can clearly see that they were borrowing liberally from Dracula. Of course, it would be another 5 years until silent would start to make the transition to talkies. And of course, it all started with A Star is Born in 1927. And what's funny is that the very first sound newsreel came out May 25th of 1927 about Charles Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic. Well, approximately 50 years after that Charles Lindbergh newsreel, on May 25th, 1977, we would have Star Wars. So, and not to go into Star Wars from Nosferatu, I'm sorry about that. But let me just say that it would be awesome to see Star Wars on the big screen for 2027, because not only would it celebrate Star Wars, it would also celebrate sound on film. The 100th anniversary of sound on film. I can't think of a better way to do that, to celebrate that, than Star Wars. And I'd certainly recommend going that far over the jazz singer. Yeah, I mean, some of the Count Orlock images coming up here are are the most identifiable. We'll let them get to them. Of course, the most famous one is when he's going up the stairs, but that's going to be in the very last reel. No, I must go. I must get home as quickly as possible. I mean, actors in silent films, I think, get a bad rap because you got to understand that it was a brand new medium, it was brand new technology, and a lot of people noted that a lot of silent film stars tend to be very stiff when they appear on camera, and that's just because they were still trying to feel things out, and they were acting as if they were on a stage. What's funny, because of the fact that these were silent movies, that you could basically say whatever you want while the shoot is still going on. In other words, people would take breaks and everything, and when you think that something would be recorded, of course it won't be recorded. So they were like just talking in between takes all the time, having conversations. And a lot of times when you watch silent films, what you read on the intertitles isn't necessarily what the actor is saying at that point in time when the movie was being shot. So they could be like cursing up a storm, and we would have no clue because they would just cover it up with the intertitle. Now, of course, it would be Flora Stoker eventually would sell the rights to Dracula for a stage adaptation later in the 1920s. But of course, most famously, of course, when Universal Studios got a hold of the character, oh, plague. A plague epidemic has broken out in Transylvania and the Black Sea ports of Varna and Galaz. Masses of young people are dying. All victims appear to have the same strange wounds on their necks, the origin of which is still a mystery to doctors. The Dardanelles have been closed all ships suspected of carrying the plague. So, yes, the arrival of Count Orlock means that he's brought the plague with him in the form of rats. I was going to mention real quick that I've actually been to Romania, and I've actually been to the castle of Vlad the Impaler, which of course is usually considered a primary inspiration for Dracula, although both of them have very little in common. In fact, there's really even no direct evidence in Stoker's writings that he actually drew upon Vlad the Impaler to tell the story. But I will say, when I was in Romania and I checked them out, they were nice castles. They were nice castles, and I could see, at the very least, I could see it being a great setting for a Dracula story, even if primary inspiration isn't there. But of course, I was saying that 9 years after the release of Nosferatu, of course, we would have the Todd Browning version starring Bela Lugosi, who of course would become the most famous Dracula, I think, of all time. I mean, yeah, I would argue that Bela Lugosi is way more popular and endurable than Max Schreck. Although, because Max Schreck is generally considered the ugliest vampire in motion picture history. But then again, I would argue that we've seen images of Max Schreck as Count Orlock just as much, if not more, than Bela Lugosi as Dracula. I'm sure we've seen enough in terms of where it's being utilized in public domain, reels and everything, television and whatnot. I mean, we've seen these images plenty of times growing up and everything. But I mean, there would be many more adaptations of Dracula after Nosferatu. Probably the most famous at the moment being Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, which of course has the most embarrassing Keanu Reeves performance in movie history. Although everything surrounding Keanu Reeves is great. Okay, everything. And Gary Oldman made a wonderful, wonderful Dracula in that. And I even like Winona Ryder. I think that people give her a bad rap in the Bram Stoker Dracula 1992 version, which also had like Anthony Hopkins, some great actors. And that was a huge hit. It won Oscars. It was a huge hit, which is amazing. A lot of people like the vampire films, like, you have The Lost Boys, is a very popular example. By the light of the sinking sun, the captain and first mate said goodbye to the last of their comrades. Oh, yes, the plague has taken over the ship, essentially. Ugh. I actually served on the ship in the military for about. I served on two different ships. I was on the USS Fort McHenry, and I was also on the USS Arleigh Burke out of Virginia. And a lot of days, a lot of lonely days and nights out in the middle of the ocean, which I'll never forget. I'm going below. If I'm not back up in 10 minutes. But anybody in the chat, I mean, Cliff, Daniel, Christian, please tell me your thoughts on Nosferatu, and I'll be sure to share them with everybody. I mean, this is one of the most iconic horror movies ever made, and it deserves to be seen by as many people as possible in the best possible version, honestly. And I got to say, this restored version, even though it's about 10 years old, it fits the bill perfectly. I mean, watching the public domain version on YouTube, that's like watching a VHS version from the 80s or 90s, which would be fine. But man, I just love the tinting on the restored version, and hear all the rats coming out of Orlock's coffin here. And oh, here's one of the most famous shots ever when he just stands up like this. And it's like, ah. And he has claws on both hands like Freddy Krueger, of course. We are approximately 1 hour and 1 minute into Nosferatu. 1 hour and 1 minute if you're watching the restored version. We have approximately 34 minutes left to go in the movie. But yeah, that's one of the most famous shots of Nosferatu and, of course, cinema as a whole, when he just stands up like that without bending. It's absolutely amazing. Oh, this is just great, great, great stuff. Him just walking around with his claws and everything. I mean, the makeup is terrific. But here again, I don't want to go. I don't want to go back to the whole Jewish stereotype which has been associated with Max Schreck's appearance as Count Orlock. The Death Ship had a new captain. Oh man. Oh, this is just great, great stuff. And that is the end of Act 3, and we are starting Act 4 now. It is difficult to say how the weakened young Hutter was able to overcome all the obstacles of the trip home. Meanwhile, the deadly breath of Nosferatu filled the sails of the ship so that it flew towards its goal. Oh, just amazing. Just amazing. And Shrek actually had a second collaboration with Nosferatu director F.W. Murnau, which was the comedy The Grand Duke's Finances in 1924. So 2 years after Nosferatu, Max Schreck and F.W. Murnau would work again. Even Murnau did not hesitate to declare his contempt for the picture, though. In 1926, Schreck returned to the Kammerspiel in Munich and continued to act in films, surviving the advent of sound until 1936, when, of course, he died from heart failure. And one of Schreck's contemporaries recalled that he was a loner with an unusual sense of humor and skill in playing grotesque characters. He also reported that he, quote, lived in a remote and incorporeal world, and that he often spent time walking through forests. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I do find that absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I think it's terrific, right up my alley, atmospherically speaking. Yes. Yeah, I mean, the atmosphere for films like this, I just can't get enough of it. I mean, the silent film atmosphere combined with the gothic atmosphere and the expressionism. I mean, I think it's cinematic heaven, to be perfectly honest, right here. Cinematic heaven. But here again, I did admit, like I admitted before, that I do have a special love of silent film as an obscure genre. I have a very, very special love for this genre. My favorite silent film of all time, which is the one I would show to any person who is open to watching a silent film for the first time. Believe it or not, it's not Nosferatu. And believe it or not, it's not Metropolis, Fritz Lang's Metropolis from 1927. Although I will admit that the Giorgio Moroder version of Metropolis from 1983, I really enjoyed the songs that one because, come on, if you're going to connect with today's audience with a silent movie, why not put contemporary music in? I mean, look, I love orchestras just as much as the next person. You know, I will listen to silent music being done on a piano or whatever the case may be. I mean, the first time I watched Gold Rush, the piano score was done by a gentleman named William P. Perry, and I just got used to how he played the piano in that matching every single action and movement and gesture on the screen. I mean, it's remarkable what a lot of these musicians accomplish when they make a musical accompaniment to the movie. The music is now at a fever pitch here as we see Orlock emerging from the boat. There are his claws and everything. Oh, this guy is just, I mean, Max Schreck is, oh man, still makes an impression 100 years later, still making a massive, massive impression. But sorry, I was going to say real quick, my favorite silent film of all time, which I would show to anybody interested in silent cinema, would be Harold Lloyd's The Kid Brother, which the stunts in that movie are amazing. I mean, just as amazing as Buster Keaton in The General or Charlie Chaplin in The Gold Rush. I have surmised that vampires can only draw their shadowy strength from the cursed earth in which they were buried. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Next to Nosferatu 1922, probably my favorite vampire movie. It's a little bit more obscure, but it's from the 1980s, and it's called Vamp, with Grace Jones as a vampire in a strip club. And I just find that movie a lot of fun with Chris Makepeace and Robert Ressler and Geddy Watanabe. You know, there's college students and they go, they want to go to a strip club and they end up running afoul of Grace Jones as a stripper, vampire stripper. But it's wonderful. It's a wonderful film, vampire film from the 80s. But otherwise, I'm just not the biggest fan of the vampire genre. I've seen my fair share of vampire films. I mean, Queen of the Damned and Rice. I've seen even schlock like that. But vampires are not my favorite horror characters. I must confess. Interestingly enough, of like the universal monsters, for instance, I mean, Dracula is not my favorite. As a matter of fact, my favorite is The Mummy, directed by Karl Freund and starring Boris Karloff from 1932. Excuse me. We are currently 1 hour and 9 minutes in, about 1 hour, 9 minutes and 30 seconds. And we have just under 26 minutes left to go. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll probably be done in about 16 minutes, which is, just fine because I pretty much kind of exhausted myself in terms of everything to say about Nosferatu. Like I said, if I was going to make a list of the most important silent films that were made, if I was going to make a list of 20 or so, this would definitely be on there. I mean, it's no way. I mean, whether No matter how you feel about horror, no matter how you feel about silent movies, this is a iconic movie that should be viewed by everybody, I think. Oh, look at that! I love how you see his claw-like fingers on one side of him when he's coming in on the boat, and he's has a coffin in his other arm. Oh, this is amazing. Yeah, I mean, I am convinced Max Schreck is probably the most grotesque and ugly vampire on screen, arguably, even after 100 years. I think that he is absolutely, without a doubt, the ugliest and the most grotesque. Nobody has, I think, done what Max Schreck has done with Nosferatu when they play vampires. I'm sorry. Tom Cruise in Interview with the Vampire? Hell no. Okay. I don't think anybody can top Max Schreck in that regard. I really don't. I've only seen one Harold Lloyd film called Movie Crazy, and I absolutely loved it. Yeah. Harold Lloyd deserves just as much recognition as Chaplin and Keaton, but Kid Brother. I mean, I love Sherlock Jr. by Keaton. I love City Lights by Chaplin, and of course, I love films like Grandma's Boy and The Freshman. Who Adam Sandler is very familiar with those movies. If you've seen like The Water Boy and stuff like that, yeah, he draws upon Harold Lloyd a lot. Yeah, there is a 1923 film called Grandma's Boy, and no, it does not involve pot smoking. Oh man, great! You're going to give the plague to everybody. Oh wow. So yeah, I absolutely regret the fact that I should have returned the 1979 film, but here again, I'm not the biggest Klaus Kinski person. I mean, even though I should see it as a Werner Herzog movie more than a Klaus Kinski performance, but the 1979 film is definitely worth seeing, as is Shadow of the Vampire, starring John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe in the famed role of Max Schreck, portraying Count Orlock. Mm-hmm. Hey, Cable Channel 11, how you doing? One more timestamp here real quick. We are at, on the restored version, 1 hour, 13 minutes, and 30 seconds. And that'll be the very last timestamp I do for tonight. 1 hour, 13 minutes, and 30 seconds. So we have approximately 21 minutes. Yeah, 21 minutes left of Nosferatu. Although, like I said, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll probably have 10 minutes left by now. But let me go ahead and say to everybody out in the chat, as well as just to get it out there. But next week, like I said, every Saturday night at 10 p.m., I do another audio commentary. Next week, I will be doing Tales from the Crypt, directed by Freddie Francis, which is the horror anthology from 1972 from England, starring actors such as Joan Collins, Ralph Bates, so many actors involved in that movie. We will be watching that next week on Saturday, March 5th. We will be doing Tales from the Crypt. And on Saturday, March 12th, maybe at 10 p.m., I might make it a little bit earlier, but we will, in fact, be doing a 50th anniversary audio commentary for The Godfather. The Godfather, written and directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Okay, I have to throw it out real quick. I love that picture up on the wall there, that painting of the ship and everything. That looks like something that would be playing in like Moby Dick or something, like in a tavern or something like that. It's just really, really cool stuff. Really, really cool. So yeah, as I said, next week I'll be doing Tales from the Crypt. The week after that will be The Godfather, and then after that will be Slaughterhouse Five and some other films that I have lined up. But that is just to give you a preview of what's to come in the in the upcoming weeks. But yeah, like I said, every Saturday night for the rest of 2022 will be an audio commentary at 10 p.m. Forbid the citizenry to transport the suspected plague-stricken to the hospital. Mm. And this shall only spread the plague through the streets of our town. Of course. I'm about 15 minutes into Tales from the Crypt. Had to stop it last night after getting too sleepy. Yeah, that's the thing is that I can understand watching films, and it's not that like they're boring, but like, oh, you just need sleep. You need sleep, and you wish that it would, that it would end already or whatever. But I'm looking forward to Tales from the Crypt. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see. Okay, this is the end of Act 4. We are now starting Act 5, the very last act of Nosferatu, according to the restored version. We are at 1 hour and 17 minutes into the movie. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that I honestly, the reason why I fell in love with the art of motion pictures in the first place is that it's the closest that we will ever come to time travel. And with Nosferatu, it really does feel like I've traveled back in time to 1922 Germany. It really is astonishing. Like I said, no cell phones, no modern technology. They barely had the phone. I don't think the radio had been developed yet. This point in time. And films were a brand new medium. They were something that were very experimental and very, just new. Hutter had made Ellen promise not to touch the book, which had caused him to have such frightening visions, but she found its strange force irresistible. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wasn't bored. It was just 2 a.m. Oh, yeah, I hear that, brother. I hear that. Trust me. Trust me. At night, that same Nosferatu digs his claws into its victims and suckles himself on the hellish elixir of their blood. Oh, yes. Now, I don't think I talked much about the actress here. I know I wrote her name down, but hold on just 1 second. Beware that his shadow does not engulf you in a demonic nightmare. Oh, man. But this is an actress by the name of Greta Schroeder. Oh, I especially love this. Deliverance is possible by no other means but that an innocent maiden maketh the vampire heed not the first crowing of the cock. This done by the sacrifice of her own blood. Absolutely. Yeah, Greta Schroeder was a German actress. She was best known for the role of Thomas Hutter's wife and Count Orlock's victim in Nosferatu. In the fictionalized 2000 film Shadow of the Vampire, she is portrayed as having been a famous actress during the making of the movie, but in fact, she was little known. The bulk of her career was during the 20s, and she continued to act into the 50s, but by the 1930s, her roles had diminished to only occasional appearances. Following a failed marriage with the struggling actor Ernest Matre, she was married to actor and film director Paul Wegener, the director of The Golem, who, of course, the writer of Nosferatu, who adapted Dracula, also wrote the Golem movies from the late 1910s. So, yeah, she didn't do a lot of movies after this. She really didn't. Although she did write The Phantom of the Opera. She did actually penned a 1916 adaptation of Phantom of the Opera. So there's something. There's definitely something. But in the movie Shadow of the Vampire, she's played by Catherine McCormick, an actress who I particularly adore. She was in Braveheart with Mel Gibson, and she also was in Dangerous Beauty, which is one of my all-time favorite movies from 1998, starring Catherine McCormick and Rufus Sewell. But yeah, she wasn't very well known, evidently, when she made this movie, and not afterward. And the shame is that a lot of silent actors and actresses were thrown to the wayside because, well, a lot of people didn't know how they would sound on film. I mean, one of the most famous of silent actresses, Clara Bow, she had made a couple movies with Frederick March, and even though she passed the vocal test, the thing is that Frederick March was the one that became a star, while Clara Bow, unfortunately, didn't do much after that. I'll run over quickly and fetch Severs. So yeah, we're about an hour and 30 seconds in. We're almost done here. We're almost done. But we're about to see the most unforgettable images of Nosferatu, particularly the walk up the stairs, which I think practically everybody has seen, even if they don't know it's from the 1922 version of Nosferatu. I mean, and it's still chilling and effective after all these years, an entire century. And that's the thing. I mean, considering the fact it is 100 years since these films were made, they need to be seen over the course of the next few years. I mean, movies like Nosferatu and The Phantom Carriage and Haxan, Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, The Kid Brother, The Gold Rush. All of these movies need to be seen 100 years later. And they need to be embraced, they need to be cherished, and they need to be treasured. Absolutely. Double checking the Deliverance is Possible page. Yes, the first crowing of the cock, this done by the sacrifice of her own blood. Absolutely. And I tend to like the inner titles best, where you're able to read them, and they basically are able to somehow magically cut to the next image right after you finish reading, instead of having to wait. Because I mean, that's the thing. This restored version is about 10 minutes longer, and I'm just wondering if is it because they're spending more time on the inner titles? I'm not exactly sure. People saw him, they fled from the house and strangled the guard. Oh no. Yep, Nosferatu is coming for you. He strangled him. He's a vampire. Since we are getting very close to the end, I think it would be absolutely appropriate. I want to bring up this comment I found on the public domain version, which I found fascinating. But if you're watching the public domain version on YouTube, this is the very first comment, or the top comment, rather. My great grandmother saw this movie at her tiny hometown theater in the 1920s. She took an aisle seat because my grandma went too, in a baby stroller she kept next to her in the aisle. The air conditioning was large blocks of ice set in front of electric fans. The audience spoke the text aloud together for the benefit of anyone that couldn't read. Many people were illiterate in those days, After the movie, it was several blocks to walk home alone in the dark since my great grandpa worked that night, and great grandma said she was terrified the whole way home and jumped straight into bed with the baby and pulled the covers over her head, and she left the lights on too. That's about as close to a um, first person account of the reaction of Nosferatu in 1922 in Germany that you're likely going to get. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So, yeah, I can imagine this film terrified or traumatized audiences. And now we have chaos. And here they're going to get Renfield, or the Renfield stand-in, rather. mm. Everybody watching the public domain version should be finished by now, because on this version we only have about 7 minutes left to go. And I'm pretty much going to end the stream right after the movie's over, just to let everybody know as we get into the final stretch here. Yes, we believe that you're terrified. We believe that you're terrified by that. Just wait. Here it comes. Here it comes. The most famous shot in Nosferatu and one of the most famous shots in movie history is coming up here in just a moment. I mean, seriously, he looks like he has rattlesnake eyes or something like that. I mean, it's inhuman. It is strikingly inhuman how Count Orlock looks. It's just amazing. Yeah, he's a great help there. Yes. Great stuff. Great stuff. I love the ears. You know, he has those pointed Spock-like ears. Those are amazing. I wonder what the makeup process was like for Count Orlock here. See, that's what I'm saying. This stuff, I think, would have been petrifying to any audience in 1922. I can definitely see audiences watching this as if it was like The Exorcist to like people in 1973. This is some traumatizing stuff. Bulwer, get Bulwer. So yeah, he leaves her alone, very, very vulnerable to the vampire that is about to go up the stairs here. Yeah, great music, great imagery. There it is. Oh man. I mean, that is still creepy as hell 100 years later. Still creepy as hell. Like I said, heavy use of shadow. No need to be graphic with like any blood or anything. Just, good old fashioned silent shadow techniques with what limited technology they had at the time. I mean, here again, just extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. Less than 5 minutes to go. And there he is, going to town on her neck. They call it Knock. Knock being, of course, this movie's version of Renfield. See, that's the thing. You don't even need to show any blood. I mean, that alone in the shadows is just enough. Get it. What is that? Is that a cock? That is a crowing cock. Oh, God, the eyebrows. That is definitely a cock. It is morning. The sunlight is coming through. Now, forgive me if I mentioned this earlier, but of course, this was the very first time where sunlight was treated as a threat to vampires, that sunlight will actually kill them, when before sunlight was just treated as almost a nuisance. They don't like sunlight, but they can deal with it. Well, here we actually see a vampire die, or rather in this case kind of just disappear in physical way, due to the sunlight. Sort of destroying him how water destroys the Wicked Witch of the West and Wizard of Oz. Yep, and just disappears. Smoke in the ground just completely evaporates, essentially. Completely evaporates. The master is dead. Yes, the master is in fact dead. Rest in peace, Max Schreck. Rest in peace, F.W. Murnau. I mean, I'm telling you, this film will be watched and will be discussed 100 years from now. No question. This will probably live on until the end of time. Hutter. Oh no. And she dies. Oh man. Yep, almost done here. About 30 seconds till we shut down. But I will let everybody. Oh, and the truth bore witness to the miracle. At that very moment, the great death came to an end, and the shadow of the bird was gone, as if obliterated by the triumphant rays of the living sun. And so we come to the end of one of the most iconic and legendary silent movies ever made, Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. And this restoration was done in 2006 by Luciano Biorita on behalf of the Friedrich Wilhelm, there you go, reconstructive of Hans Erdmann's original 1921 score. So, yeah, if you're going to buy this on physical media, you definitely have to get the Kino version. You definitely have to get the Kino version from 2013, no question. No question. But yeah, at any rate, thank you very much, Cliff. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody else out in the chat that came out tonight. Cliff Booth, Cable Channel 11, Christian Hannah Horror, and Daniel Shine. You guys rock. I love all you guys. Thank you so much for coming out tonight to watch with me Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horror. And like I said, next Saturday night at 10 p.m. will be Tales from the Crypt, the 1972 horror anthology directed by Freddie Francis. And then right after that will be The Godfather on Saturday, March 12th. Looking forward to seeing you all then. You all have a great evening.